My name is John Parker. Now, I live in a place not too far from here, a place called Ripley, Ohio, right alongside the Ohio River. And I live there with my wife and my children, and I have my own foundry there. You all know what a foundry is, right? It's where we mold iron together to make tools that you all might use on your farms. But I know you're not here to hear about what I do during the daytime, because it's at nighttime when I go across the river looking for those who are trying to escape from that horrible, wretched institution called slavery. I know you've heard many things about slavery. Some people may have told you that slavery is a good thing, that slaves are well taken care of, that they're given food and clothing and a roof over their head, but I'm here to tell you that that's a lie. That anytime you take away a person's ability to live and think for themselves, it can never be a good thing. Well, I know you're looking at me and you're saying, well, how do you know? Well, you live up here in Ohio and you have your own home and your own business and your own family, but it wasn't always like that for me. For in 1827, I was born a slave in Norfolk, Virginia. And at 8 years old, I was snatched away from my very own mother. Can you imagine? Being taken away from the woman who raised you, the woman who bore you, the woman who cared for you. Just sit and imagine if you were sitting at home at the dinner table with your mother and your father, and all of a sudden a group of men come storming into your house and they snatch you away from your parents and they tell you that you never see them again. How would you feel? Scared? Angry? And I was very angry. How do you take away an 8-year-old boy away from his own mother? And when they took me away from my mother, they chained me to an old man who had chained to a whole line of slaves, and we were all forced to march all the way from Norfolk, Virginia to Mobile, Alabama. In every city they'd stop me and they'd sell a group of us here and a group of us there. But I was so angry that they had done this to me that I would kick my feet at the bubbles in the brook, and I'd pick up sticks. I swung sticks at the flowers. I picked up rocks. I threw rocks at the birds, because the birds and the flowers and the bubbles, they were all free. But I wasn't. And I couldn't understand why this had happened to me. When we got to Mobile, Alabama, I was sold away to a doctor. Now, this doctor wasn't a mean man. He actually treated me pretty good. He had 2 sons who were about my age, and we would go off and play together, and they would go to school. Now, of course, I couldn't go to school because it was illegal to teach a slave how to read and write. But when they came back from school, without the doctor knowing about it, they would teach me what they learned in school. And so through them, I learned how to read. And when I learned how to read, I would read the Bible and Shakespeare and all kinds of poetry. But eventually, they got older. And the doctor sent them off to school in the north. And it was just me and the doctor. And the doctor told me, he said, well, you'll never make a good houseman, so you got 2 choices. You can either 1, become a field slave and work out on the fields, or 2, you go out into the city of Mobile, Alabama, learn a skill or a trade, and the money you make doing that, you bring that back to me. Of course, he recommended the latter choice. So I went out into the city of Mobile, Alabama to learn a skill or a trade, and the first person I went to work for was a plasterer. Now, this plasterer was a very mean man, and many times he would come into the shop and he'd be drunken with alcohol. And one day I was working on a project and I must have been doing something wrong, because he came behind me with a lath, and a lath is like a rubber belt with a nail at the end of it. And he began to whip me on the back with that lath, and my back bled so badly that I had to be taken to a slave hospital. And at the slave hospital, there were dozens of slaves, many who were sick or hurt or bleeding. And there was this woman who worked in the hospital who would walk up and down the alleyway. Anybody who made too much noise, she'd whip them with the whip. Now, I always had a problem with those who like to pick on others because they're smaller or weaker than them. I remember when I was chained to that line of slaves, I remember there were other children there as well. And there was one child who was about half my size. And there was another child who was bigger than the both of us put together. And one day the big child decided that he was going to take the food away from the smaller child. And I got so angry that he did this that I ran behind him and I jumped on his back and I began to swing my arm till he finally gave the food back to the smaller child. So I always had a problem with those who like to pick and bully on others. And when I was at that slave hospital, there was a woman next to me who was crying out in pain because she was hurting so bad. And that woman who worked in the hospital, she walked over to us and she raised her whip to whip her. And I raised my hand to stop her. And she slapped me. She raised her whip again. So I jumped up and I snatched the whip away from her. And I began to whip her with it. Then I dropped the whip. And I ran off because I knew they would kill me for what I had just done in the hospital. So I ran away from the hospital, ran away from Mobile, Alabama, hoping to never go back again because I knew they would take my life for what I had done. So I ran off. And three times I was caught and got away. But on the fourth time I was caught, I was taken to jail. And while I was in jail, the doctor came to see me, and the doctor was surprised to see me. He had given up hope on never finding me. He said, listen, you come back with me to Mobile, Alabama. I'll make sure that you don't get in any trouble for what happened at the hospital. So I went back to Mobile, Alabama with the doctor. I didn't get in any trouble for what happened at the hospital. But every single job I went to, I would learn a skill. I became a great blacksmith. I would pick up trades. I learned how to mold iron together into tools. But I would always get into some kind of trouble. And so the doctor decided that he was going to have to sell me as a field slave. And I knew that I wouldn't survive as a field slave. And so the doctor had a patient, Mrs. Ryder, and Mrs. Ryder would come see the doctor every single week. And I would go to Mrs. Ryder and ask her, please, Mrs. Ryder, please buy me. And of course, she wouldn't pay me no mind, but I persistently asked Mrs. Ryder, and my persistence finally won her over. And after she decided to buy me, after a little over a year, I was able to work hard enough to not only pay her back, but to buy my own freedom. And when that time came, after I bought my own freedom, I moved away from Mobile, Alabama, out of the South, first to Indiana, then to Cincinnati, Ohio. And it was there in Cincinnati that I was introduced to the Underground Railroad. Now, at first, I didn't want to have anything to do with it. I just came out of the South, just came away from slavery. I didn't want to go back, but I decided to help my roommate this one particular time. And after helping him one time go across the river and help a group that he knew, I decided to make it my life's purpose to help everybody I could escape out of the clutches of slavery. So eventually I got married to a Miranda Bowden, and we moved to Ripley, Ohio. Now, Ripley, Ohio is a very interesting town because there aren't many people in Ripley, Ohio who are pro-slavery. And they do everything they can do to protect the institution of slavery. And they'll have patrollers every night walking up and down the Ohio River looking for those who are trying to escape and also looking for those who help those who were trying to escape. But also in Ripley, Ohio, you have those who are anti-slavery. And you have families like the Collins family and the Campbell's family and the McCaig family. And the leader of all the Abolitionists in Ripley, Ohio, is a man named Reverend John Rankin. And Reverend John Rankin has a house way up on top of the hill, and you can see his house all the way from the Kentucky side of the river. And every single night, his wife would light a candle and put it in the window, and those who were running knew that if they made it to that house, the people there would help them. But as for the Rankins, and the Collins, and the Campbells, and the McCaigs, they would only help those who came knocking on their door at nighttime. But as for me, I would go across the river looking for those who were trying to get away. I remember one day I was working in my foundry, and I got word that there was a group of about 10 slaves. They were 20 miles deep in Kentucky. Their leader had been shot, and they had nobody to lead them to the Ohio River. So I decided that I would go and help them. So I made arrangements with a friend of mine to meet me on the other side of the river with a boat big enough to bring the whole group across. And I made my way down deep into Kentucky. You see, there had been other slaves who were sneaking food to them at nighttime, and they helped lead me to where they were. So when I found them, they were hiding in the woods, and they were scared. They were terrified because they knew that if they were caught, or even if they went back on their own, that they would be punished, that they would be beaten or whipped, and that they might even be killed. So when I got to them, I said, listen, if you follow me, I will lead you to the Ohio River. But you have to follow my every word. You cannot go astray. So we began to make our way to the Ohio River. But there was a group of men looking for them who were so close to us that we had to travel both at nighttime and during the daytime. So by the time we made it to the Ohio River, we were there a full day ahead of schedule, and there was no boat there waiting for us. So we began to frantically search the area looking for a boat. And while we were looking for a boat, a patroller came down the side of the river and he spotted us. And he seen how many of us it was, and he ran off, and I knew he was going to get help. So we frantically were searching for a boat, and finally we found the boat, but then there were no oars in the boat to push us across. So everybody began to search the area looking for the oars to the boat. And while they were searching, we heard men's voices and horses and dogs coming down the side of the river. So I ran over to the boat because I was going to break the seat off the boat and use that to push us across, but I kicked the hitting under the sand with the oars to the boat. So I dug out the oars and said, woohoo! I caught everybody to the boat. And as we got to the boat, I noticed that the boat was too small and everybody couldn't fit in the boat. And 2 men had to be left on the side of the river. I didn't have time to do anything about it, so I got ready to row. But then one of the women in the boat began to cry because her husband was one of those men left on the side of the river. It was at that moment that I witnessed the greatest example of courage and sacrifice that I had ever seen, when a man who was safe and secure in the boat on his way to freedom decided to get up and let that woman's husband take his place. I didn't have time to do anything, so I just began to row and row and row. And as we got about a third of the way across the river, we heard men shouting, and then we heard a gunshot. And we knew that those men who were in sight of freedom were caught. I know the job I do is dangerous. And yes, I do put my life on the line, but what I do is no more dangerous than those who decide to run away. Because most of those who decide to run away, most of them are caught. And when they are caught, they are beaten. They are whipped. Sometimes a foot is cut off so they can't run anymore. And many times they are beaten to death so that other slaves would see what happened to them and not do the same thing. But their desire for freedom is so strong that they're willing to risk a beating. They're willing to risk losing a limb. They're willing to risk their very lives just to be free. And if they're willing to risk their lives for freedom, then I'm willing to risk my life to help them get it. I remember the most dangerous time I had was when I went to rescue a young man and his wife and child. And I remember, now I was working in my foundry one day. It's important to know that in my foundry, I hire people from all over the area. I hire people who live throughout Ripley, Ohio, and the outskirts of Ripley, Ohio. I even hire people of different races and different backgrounds, and those who live across the river in Kentucky. And there was one particular employee I had who lived in Kentucky who would come across the river and work in my foundry, and he would always pick on me. He'd say things like, I bet you're one of those men that like to help slaves across the river. And of course, I would always deny it and say, I don't have time to do that. I've got a family to take care of. I've got a business to run. But one day he came up to me, he said, I dare you to try to steal away one of my father's slaves. And I told him, I said, listen, I don't have time to do that. But in the back of my head, I began to think about how I could help somebody from that particular farm. And so that night, I made my way across the river. And I didn't find anyone right away, but on the next night, I found my man. And we made arrangements that we would meet in a particular spot on next week. And he would bring his wife and his child, and I would help lead them up north to Canada. So after a small altercation, I made it back home safely that night. And then on the next week, I took my own boat across the river. And I hid my boat in the bushes. And then I went over to that spot to meet that man. And I waited. And I waited. And I waited. And he didn't show up. I didn't want to come all the way over here for nothing. So I decided to go and look for him. So I went over to that farmhouse. I went to the back of the farmhouse where the cornfields were. And right behind the cornfields, there was a whole row of slave cabins. And I began to think to myself, how I was going to figure out which cabin belonged to him when I seen him step out of one of those cabins and he began to pace nervously back and forth, pace back and forth. So I got down real low and I made my way into the cornfields. And he heard something. So he made his way into the cornfields. And there, I tapped him on the shoulder. I said, man, what are you doing? Listen, I got my boat. Get your wife, get your child. I can take you right now. He said, no, we can't go. We can't go. I didn't want anybody to hear us. So I told him to make his way back to his cabin, blow out the candle, and wait in the front room. And he went over to his house, blew out the candle, and waited in the front room. I waited a while, made sure nobody was looking, and then I made my way to his cabin. And when I stepped into the front room, he and his wife were standing there. I said, listen, don't be afraid now. This may be your only chance for freedom. Come with me and I'll take you across the river. He said, no, we can't go. We can't go. Listen. He said, ever since I met with you last week, our owners began to suspect that we were going to run away. And so every night they take our baby into their bedroom and they sleep with our baby in their bedroom. And right next to him, he has a chair with a candle and a gun. He said he'll shoot anybody that comes into his bedroom at nighttime. So we can't go. I looked at the man and his wife. I said, listen, this may be your only chance for freedom. Leave the baby and come with me. The man's wife said, no, I'm not leaving my baby. I'm not leaving my baby. So I looked at the man. I said, well, listen, you got to go and get the baby. Just sneak in there real quiet, grab the baby. We'll be waiting on the outside. I'll take you to my boat. He said, oh, no, I'm not getting shot. I didn't want to come all the way over here for nothing. So I decided that I would go and get the baby. So I took off my shoes and handed them to the man and said, here, you take my shoes, you and your wife, you go to the side of the road. I'll go and get the baby. Now, if you hear a gunshot or anything, you run back to your cabin, you toss my shoes in the fire, I'll take care of myself. And so they made their way to the side of the road. And I made my way up the hill to the back of the farmhouse. And I stepped up to the back porch of the farmhouse, up the stairs, across to the back door. I flipped open the latch to the back door, and I opened the back door. And the room was pitch dark. And I began to think to myself that I had never done anything this dangerous before. But as my eyes got used to the darkness, I gathered up my courage and I stepped across the threshold into the back room. It seemed like every place I stepped, the floorboards would creak loud enough to wake the whole house. But I looked up and noticed there was a light shining through the bottom of one of the doors as if a candle was lit on the other side. I guess this was the owner's bedroom. So I made my way to that door. And when I got over to that door, I reached over to flip open the latch, and my heart failed me. What if I was caught? Who would take care of my wife and my children? There was a fugitive slave law that stated that if you're caught helping a slave, you would be fined, you would be jailed, and all your property would be confiscated. Everything I worked for would have been taken away from me. So I gathered up some courage. I reached over to flip open that latch. My heart failed me again. What if they decided not to take me back across the river? What if they decided to kidnap me and make me a slave all over again? So I gathered up some more courage, and I reached over to flip open that latch. And I flipped open the latch, and when I flipped open the latch, I made up in my mind that I had come too far to give up now. And so I began to open up the door a little ways, and then all of a sudden, So I put my ear to the door and I listened until I heard the regular, steady breathing of the owner and his wife sleeping. So then I opened up the rest of the door. And there I saw the owner and his wife sleeping in the bed. Right next to the owner was a chair with a candle and 2 horse pistols. Now, I didn't see the baby right away, but I guess that the baby must have been on the other side of the bed, so if it woke up at night, his wife would be the one to take care of it. So I got down real low, and I began to make my way around to the foot of the bed. When I got down to the bottom of the foot of the bed, the door shut behind me. But the owner rolled around in the bed and continued to sleep. So I began to make my way around the foot of the bed. Then I noticed at the foot of the bed a small bundle. I had guessed that this was the baby. So I stood up and I slipped my hands up under the bundle. And as I began to pull the baby from the bed said, and the man jumped up and he reached over for his guns and he knocked over the candle and the whole room went dark. So I ran out the room with the baby and I ran out the back porch running with the baby in my hand. And the man and his wife, they see me running with the baby and they began to run along the side of the road. But as I was running across the field, I heard a gunshot and a bullet zipped past my head. But I kept on running with the baby. But the man and his wife, when they heard the gunshot, they turned around and they began to run back to their cabin. So I ran past them. I said, listen, I got the baby. If you want him, you better follow me. And I kept on running till I heard the pitter-patter feet running behind me. Then we made it all the way to the Ohio River. I gave the baby to the man's wife. I pulled my boat out the bushes. I told them to get into the boat. I told the man to put his head down real low so they only see 2 people in the boat. I began to row and row and row and row. And then we heard men shouting. And I recognized the voice of my employee. And he began to yell, you all better come on back here. You better get back here now. You're not going to get away with this. Come on back here. Of course, we didn't listen. I kept rowing and rowing and rowing and rowing till we got all the way to the Ohio side of the river. And I pulled my boat ashore. Then I went to the man. I said, hand me my shoes. He said, oh, I dropped the shoes and we were running on the side of the road. I didn't have time to deal with it, so I took them over to my friend, the attorney's house. Now, he's used to me coming at nighttime with strangers. I said, listen, you got to take them right now. I got to get back home. And so he took them in his house. I ran down the street, ran to my house, ran upstairs, took off my clothes, jumped in the bed, and I waited. And I waited. Because I knew soon enough, boom, 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 there'd be a knocking on my door. Boom, 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 boom. So I got out of my bed. I went over to my bedroom window, and I opened my bedroom window. Who that there knocking on my door? And there I saw my employee, his father, and another man. And my employee looked up and said, you better let us in our house, John Parker. We know you got slaves in there. Let us in right now. I said, what slaves? What are you talking about? I'm trying to sleep. Only you would have taken that baby. Let us in. I said, what baby? I said, calm down, relax. Let me get my shoes on, and I'll come down, and I'll let you in. You'll see how many slaves in my house. They were shocked that I was going to let them in so easily. So I closed my bedroom window, went back over to my bed, and I slowly began to put on my clothes. Grabbed an old pair of shoes, and I slowly put on my shoes because I knew the longer I took with them, the better chance those slaves had of escaping. So finally, I made my way downstairs and I unlocked my front door. They stormed into my house. My employee's father, his face was so red with anger, I believe he would have shot me then and there if he'd have seen any slaves in my house. But of course, they searched every room, every corner, every nook, every cranny, and of course, there were no slaves in my house. So they began to make their way out my front door. But before they left, my employee turned around and looked at me. He said, I still believe you did it, and I'm going to prove it. And he stormed off. So I went back upstairs that night and began to think about how I was going to handle the next morning. So I came into the foundry the next morning. Sure enough, my employee comes in, storming into the foundry, waving my shoes in his hand, saying, I knew you over there last night, and I know these belong to you, and I'm going to go to every single shoe shop in town till I found out who they sold these shoes to. And he stormed off. Then I began to get a little bit worried, so I tried to make my way over to the shoe store, because sure enough, he went to every single shoe shop in Ripley, Ohio. But nobody recognized the shoes. So yes, I know what I do is dangerous, and I'm not asking you all to put your life on the line like me, but maybe you could help us out. Maybe if you can give us food or clothing or if you've got an extra room in your house that we could bring visitors by just for a short amount of time. Or maybe you've got a boat that we could use to take over the river every now and then. You see what it all be used for? Freedom. Now, I could tell you stories all day, but I have to go, and I know that you all have to go as well. But before I leave you, I'd like to leave you with a song. Now, I'm sure you've heard this song before, but I want you to think of this song in a different way. The song is called Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. Now, when you hear the term Jordan, I want you to think about the Ohio River. And when you hear the term a band of angels, I want you to think about men like me going across the river looking for those who are trying to escape. And when you hear the term home, I want you to think about freedom, finally being in a place where you can live and think for yourself. The song goes like this. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming forth to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming forth to carry me home. I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming forth to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming forth to carry me home. If you get there before I do, coming forth to carry me home, tell all of my friends I'm coming too, coming forth to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming forth to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming forth to carry me home. I thank you for your attention.